But Paul McCulloch, you call yourself subject matter expert in BowTie, right?
I do.
You like tools.
I wear lots of hats.
Yeah. You like tools, and your
I do like tools. I like data too.
Your new love is Power BI.
It is. I've gone down the Power BI rabbit hole so much.
Yeah. You are a chemical engineer by trade.
I am.
Yeah. You did auditing, setting up process safety guidance, and a lot of those activities. And now you're heading up Resilium UK together with Alistair.
Yes.
And I think that is enough of an introduction for Paul, because I am aware that you can take very good care of yourself. Have fun.
Thank you.
Have fun.
So, Power BI from the API. So, I've always had an itch that I've always wanted to use Power BI, but I didn't know how to make it connect to BowTie Server. And it felt like a really big thing that I needed to get sorted by somebody. So I'm going to blame Alex. So when Alex I saw this on the program, I got really interested. And I actually mocked up some dashboards that we should build these. And now all of a sudden I'm doing the presentation. Okay. So thankfully Alex showed me just actually how easy it is to get Server to connect to Power BI. Yeah. So to get the data coming in is quite easy. So we're not actually doing a presentation, we're going to do live stuff. So Ruben, my handsome computer geek, is going to work things as I point them. So this may go wrong, but it's my fault if it goes wrong, it's not Ruben's. And we're just going to show you potentially how easy it is, but there are some hard things to think about. Yeah? So we've had this conversation about what data do we want. So that's one of the hard things to think about. But there's a big thing behind the Power BI's, how does all that data connect together? Because Power BI's not, it has got some smart things to it, but it's not that smart. So you've got to do some wiring in the background. Yeah. So we actually have a presentation which we can send out, so you can start to actually, I can do this myself tomorrow if you have the presentation. Because you don't need somebody to connect to the database for you, you're going to use the API tool, it's available for you as long as you've got the admin rights to do it. So Ruben's going to open BowTie bulk store and log in. So this is one of the enable on demo ones that is my sort of baby. I kind of look after it. When Antoinette tries to take it away from me, I get upset. I do this for all my demos. He's going to log in. So we're now going to go to apps. We're going to go to the admin tools. And we're going to go to configuration or maintenance. I can't remember which way. Maintenance, down all the bottom to integration settings. Yeah? So a field you probably never pushed if you're the admin. Yeah? So this is about creating an account that a service is going to use to access BowTie Server. So there's a caveat with that. So we've done BowTie Server, we've got permissions, we control what data people can see. This account that we create can see everything because it's allowed to. So when you do Power BI dashboards, you've got to think about your permissions transferring to the dashboard. So there may be some bow ties you want people never to see. I've got an archive, I don't want them to see that. I've got some maybe cybersecurity bow ties, I don't want everyone to see that. So you'll have to do permission piece in Power BI, which it can do. You can do roles, you can copy your permissions, and you can control it really well. Yeah. I haven't got that deep down the rabbit hole yet, but I'm getting there. Because it is a real important thing to do. Yeah. So we've already got our Power BI connection, but if Ruben presses add a client, it's actually really simple to do. So I need a name, so what's my username for that client that's going to come in? And what's the password? I don't need to worry about the IP address because that's about whitelisting, I don't need to worry about it. And then I've got a choice about read or write, or both. For most Power BI dashboards, you're just doing read. I'm just going to pull data out of the system, I'm going to do something with it, look at it in different ways, slice it in different dashboards. Yeah. So if we cancel that and go back. So we've got our Power BI, we're going to use this as our access, and it's got read only. Yeah? So okay, so what do we do with it? How do we know what we want to use? So Ruben scrolls down to the bottom and there's something called Swagger. So Swagger tells me all about all the API stuff I can do. Click the blue button, away we go. So this lists everything I can do with BowTie Server, all the information I can get out or push into. So some things, it's a two-way conversation you can do. Yeah. So Ruben scrolls down to the read-only area, so that's what we're really interested in for Power BI dashboard. And you can see, actually, I'm splitting the things up. I can get down to the element level, which sometimes I'll actually need. But if Ruben scrolls down to hazard, we can see what the hazard call is. And there's a lot of things in this system. Yeah? I can make lots of different calls to pull data together. But if we find the hazard, I've got API REST hazard, and it will tell me what it will pull from the server for me. Yeah? So you've got to understand, what do I need from the dashboard? So if I just bring hazard, all I've got is information on the hazards. I don't have any information on the threats, the consequences, barriers. So for my API stuff, I've got to pull all the elements I actually need to make that dashboard. So if I, for example, if I wanted to show the context of where that barrier is and what its effectiveness is, I also need to pull my effectiveness table from the lookup tables. Because the connection here is just giving me the code, and then I need to translate the code into what's the real name. So you've got to think about, what do I want to pull in, and then we create all those connections. So if we jump to Power BI, so empty Power BI, so the first thing what I'm going to do is actually go to get data, because that's what I want to do. I've got lots of choices of get data, so I can connect to lots of things with Power BI. So I can make multiple connections. It's just not just for BowTie Server, BowTie Enterprise. I can start to connect to other things too, and hopefully start to group my data together around that common language of barrier names. Can I get other data coming in to give me different insights? Yeah? So we're just going to do a blank query, because we've got some weird code to put in to make the connection. It'll pop up another thing called the Power Query. This is another pop-up. This is the editor, so this is where I start to make my connections to that API. So I've got a nice empty box here. Ruben's going to copy in some code. So this is the code I need. So you can see that API rest.hazard is the piece I need. The BowTieServer.com is I'm telling it where it is. And then I've got just some code at the front, some standard code saying, it's a JSON connection, just go away and make it for me, please. But the key thing is to get the red stuff right. So depending where your server is, if it's internal or if it's external, that's the first URL. And then I'm just going to tell it what part of the API do I want. So if Ruben presses enter, it's going to say, hey, you need to specify how to connect. So edit credentials. And then I'm going to choose basic. And that's that account we've just set up. So the username is Power BI, because that's the account we've just set up in BowTie Server, BowTie Enterprise. I'm sorry, I do flip between the names, because I'm just not used to Enterprise yet. And then the password we created, Ruben will copy it in. I'm going to change all these passwords, so don't worry, no one can get access to anything with my server. Press connect. And it's saying, well, there is something real there. Yeah? So to turn it into something useful, we actually do to table. So I want to turn that data into a table. Yeah? So then it's going to ask us some more questions, just go OK, it's fairly default. And now it's saying there is some records there. So what do you want to do with these records? So we've got a little arrow up here, we click that and say turn that into real things that are in the server. So uncheck that, because it always puts column.1 in front of everything. And I just want the real name, so I uncheck that, press OK, and now it's pulling real things from that bulk store BowTie Server, BowTie Enterprise. Yeah? So this is our hazards, these are the hazards we're in here, and it actually, for those who use Scrapbook, it kind of looks like Scrapbook, because that's the same data. Yeah? So I'm accessing that same data. Okay? So you would go on and then do all the API pieces you need. Yeah? So we're going to switch to another file now. Well, we've done some others because you don't want to sit here and watch us do loads of things. And while we're talking, Ruben's going to add the other one, that one. Yeah. That one? Yeah. Oh, we've got it in already. So you can see that we've got, I've actually bought BowTie groups. I bought hazards, because hazards belong to groups. I brought in threats and consequences, because they belong to hazards. And then I've got barriers that belong to threats and consequences. And at the bottom there, I've got build phase, because that's a piece of metadata that might be useful for understanding how that connects to hazard. Yeah? So sometimes, when you start adding things to Power BI, it will attempt to make connections for you, but it doesn't actually understand how the database connects. What it really does is go to, if we can get it on a couple of boxes, movement about ID, it just starts connecting IDs together, which isn't the right thing to do. Yeah? So if you come here as you started to build stuff and see some connecting lines, you've actually got to delete them because it doesn't understand how the data connects. Okay. So if we go to ID on the hazard, Ruben, just scroll down a bit. To get that ready, if you go to threats and scroll down and find the parent hazard, so you can see here some very logic around coming out of Scrapbook, those familiar with Scrapbook, and all I do is drag ID to parent hazard. And it will make a link for me. So it's now making that threat lives with that hazard. Yeah? I could do the same thing for bowtie groups. I could do the same thing for consequence. I'm wiring the model together. So Power BI starts to understand what does this mean. Yeah? So again, you've got parent hazard, we could do that. Yeah? Okay? So you could sit there and we'll show you more finished product in a bit. So we'll look at how all these wire together, because there are some complications you've got to really understand how the model works. Yeah? Because API doesn't give you the model, it just gives you the elements, the tables. Yeah? But let's switch to making a visualization. Yeah, do that. We'll just do that. So this is the bit where I make my dashboard. Yeah? So I've got some visualizations I can do here. I've got all my data here, so you can see we've added lots of things in the API we can pull over. So we do a table, pull a table out, and in that table we'll add some things from hazard. So Ruben's got the script because he'll know what we're going to add. And we're going to add code. We're going to code, name, top event, owner, build phase. And we'll probably have a wire build phase, but maybe not do build. So down to hazard, code, name. So there's the code coming in already. There's the hazard's names coming in. There's the top event coming in now. Might have to make the table a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
And then do the other field. Stop there. That'll be all right. That'll be enough. So we've got some data here I'm starting to bring in. Yeah. So the power of Power BI is I can now start to slice that data. Go on, Paul.
It looks a little bit like the reports that exist in XP or Server, what you're trying to do. Is this in effect how they're built, and that's what you're now replicating in this?
I don't think so, no.
Because I was going to ask, do you have access to a report so that you can pull that out straight into Power BI, or have you got to rebuild it like that?
You've got to rebuild it if
You have to
same
rebuild it, definitely, because you want to automate. So you could make the report, columns and rows, look like you want to with the profile, so you can export to Excel. But that would be a manual exercise each time, right? And once you have this API connection to Power BI, you can set a refresh interval, right? And it's much more dynamic. And well, I won't try to sweep any punchline from Paul's presentation, so I'll leave it here and see if there's anything I should add at the end.
Yeah. So now there's a tool called Slicer. So now we add a slicer in here, so we can actually start to slice some of that data. So Ruben adds owner from hazards. Clicks on that owner. You can see actually it's pulled out the list of owners that are in that field that I can now slice that data from. We can go in and actually edit the slicer a little bit. So if we turn it into a drop down, it's a bit neater. So I can turn it into a vertical list or a tile or a drop down. I'm going to turn it into a drop down. So it's a bit neater now. Takes up a little bit less real estate, but now it's a drop down. So if we actually select the bottom one and do Victoria, I can now see the hazards that Victoria owns. So I'm starting to slice that document. Yeah. So if we went the whole way and then started to add the barriers, it would only bring in the barriers that Victoria owns from those bow ties. So I can really start to control what data we see. Okay. So we flip to a finished product. So I'm only 4 weeks in, but it's actually not that difficult once you start to understand the model. Yeah? So you've definitely got that piece around security. If I've got some stuff in my database I don't want people to see, you've got to do the security in Power BI too, because it doesn't copy that over. That account Power BI is a read-only and sees everything in the database. So you've got to be really conscious of that, but there is a security role piece in Power BI. So you can start to match that. I even suspect you can, if you use a single sign-on, you can use the single sign-on process and have the same list of people, and then start to do roles in it and control what people can see. Yeah, because it actually works on data in the rows. So for example, if I go to the bow tie groups, I could say this set of people can see these groups, this set of people can see that groups, and only the admins can see all the archive stuff. Or actually nobody can see the archive stuff, because why would we have archive on a live dashboard? We don't care about it, we've archived it. Yeah. If you go full screen, yeah. So you can see we had our top piece, we've got Victoria as our owner. You can see I've gone wrong slightly here because that thing has gone a little bit big, so you've got to play things and build things. But if Ruben switches owner, you'll see that the barrier list switches. So it goes to Sally, the barrier list will switch, and it's picking out all the barriers that Sally owns. These 3 bow ties, these are all her barriers. Yeah? I've also started to add links. So you can see these are actually URLs, the barrier names now. So if Ruben picks one that doesn't have any answers in it, down the barrier list, Ruben. So just one we can come back to. Click on that. It's going to take me to Bowtie server, open the barrier page, and I can go straight to my bow tie, my barrier. Yeah. So now if we press edit, because I've got edit rights for this in my account, I can go in and start to edit the data against that barrier. So actually we haven't got an owner, so let's assign an owner. Pick somebody different, yeah, pick Dave or Dan, yeah, Dan will do. And then give it effectiveness. So let's say it's partially effective. We'll press save. So we've actually now started to use our Power BI dashboard to do a very basic bow tie review. I've got some empty data in my list here. I own these bow ties. Let's start to fill out that data. Why have we not done that? Yeah. So I'm now using it to drive us putting in good quality data. Yeah. So we go back to the dashboard. So you'll see that the barrier we picked has still not been updated because the dashboard needs to refresh. So we've got a button down here that refresh data, and I've got a trick around the back as well because I'm going to go into the system and just make sure it does it, because the button I find is a little bit hit and miss. But in your Power BI services, you can start to set up refresh rates. So at the moment, because I'm on the free service, it only gives me 2 refresh dates I can set. So actually one of them was 10:45 because I thought Alistair wouldn't be late, and he's late. And so I hoped it was going to be seamless, but it wasn't. But actually you can set up a date here that says, when did it last refresh this data? Yeah. So let me just do what I'm supposed to do. Just to make sure. Find the right window, force a refresh. But once you're in your corporate system, you can manage this in a better way. The right data set. My phone is not playing ball, and it is. I'm just going to refresh the data set too. I think it's refreshed. So we go back to the dashboard. I still need to refresh the page because the page needs to rebuild. So if you refresh the page, Ruben, I'll look at the time, and the time still hasn't changed. And this is where the live demos all go wrong. I'm going to do that refresh again. It says it's done it now. And refresh the page. Yay, hey, we've got another time, new time, yeah? So then that barrier we picked, which one was it, Ruben? We put against Dave. No, it wasn't Dave, it was further down, wasn't it? I think it was Sally. Yeah, it was Sally Laws. Yeah, change the owner. Change the owner first. Sally Laws. Oh. And then it was Dave Seaton we put in, yeah, and it's partially effective. Yeah. So I can start to do lots of that sort of review process. So there's some other slides. So we've got actually 3 pages to our report. So we go to the next page. This is more like an overview for barrier owners. So I own these barriers. Again, we've got the same sort of slicer coming down that I can start to see the barriers I own. But actually I've made up some data coming in from our alarm management system, which is a completely separate system to BowTie Enterprise. But in my model, I'm now telling it that these barrier names are the same, and this is my loop data coming in, and I can start to see my alarms and trips. When did they last activate? Is the watchdog telling me they're online? So I'm starting to bring in different data for different people. Yeah? So that's the power of Power BI, to start to mesh this data together around our common language, which actually is our barrier names. You could maybe go into the process of, I've got codes for my barriers, I'm going to start to match all the codes everywhere. So there's a big piece around data quality. How do I get this data to flow? Actually, I've got to have a very common naming set to make it all flow together and make Power BI easy for it to understand. And goes to the final dashboard. So this is now pulling stuff from compliance frameworks. I'm trying to give us a different slice, so we can do things around what survey, what org unit. So if you change the org unit from M3 to M2, it will just rebuild the data and show me the different patterns. Yeah? I'm still struggling with this a little bit. There's a little bit of weak links. So BowTie Enterprise uses weak links to connect things together, like activities, questions, and answers. And Power BI struggles with 2 sets of weak links together. So I'm actually now starting to think I need to rewire it and make it permanent wiring. But the Power Query piece, I can actually write some code that says even as you add things in, it just makes those connections for you with the tables. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it myself. How do I do that? But you have to think about some of this stuff. Yeah. Okay, do you want to then show the final model? You go back to the big model and zoom out. So I don't know whether you can see a lot of these wiring, but you can see we've got lots of things we're calling in from the API, and we've established all the wiring. You have to do it manually. Yeah? The tool's not smart enough to do it for you. But it's a piece I think that grows. You know, if you're really interested in just the BowTie piece, it's actually quite simple, because it's ID to parent, whatever it is. So it's actually really easy to build it, as long as you think about the security piece too. Yeah. So you've really got to fill in that security piece. But the reality, hopefully, is you've got either Power BI specialists or even Tableau, quick links. They're all kind of the same sort of platforms. And the key is, now it's actually really easy to connect to that server. I don't need to worry about IT or anything. Go on.
Yeah, just another quick question. Are you better off having like the one screen with all the links made here? But say you've got different screen views for your Power BI, or would it be better, well, I assume that plus button is you can create separate ones for a specific slide?
Yes.
Because would it become too complicated if you were trying to map everything on one screen?
Yeah. I only realised that last night.
Right.
And it was building, we built a monster, didn't we?
Yes.
And then it didn't quite work right.
Yeah, I think the thing to realize about Power BI is that it's really good for star models, what they call, like you have a central fact that you
like if you look at the barrier,
Yeah.
we've got things that are living off it that are the metadata associated with the barrier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like the data in the database in BowTieXP is much more complicated, like everything links to everything. So it's what you're saying is right. Like it's better to have like a focused dashboard with like a small data model, because at some point Power BI gets confused about like how does the world work? I don't know. So it's better to cut it up into smaller data models with
I
specific.
was thinking
Yeah.
where I'd get confused if it was much bigger than that. Yeah.
I mean, it's also, yeah, exactly. It's also for yourself. Like, Power BI won't be the only one that's confused. And also for your users, it's good to have like simple dashboards, like a focused dashboards that do one thing really well. Of course, you connect like you can link to other like underlying dashboards, perhaps.
I was just going to add exactly that comment, because what did we do this morning is you realised I need a set of dashboards for the senior leaders, I want specific information for the managers, and probably you'll break that up as well, and then you'll have something that you might give to the workforce, and it's all fed off the same data though. So I can create a different page that answers all my little problems and all my display needs, but it's all fueled from the same data source. So it's available to me, I just don't have to model it all at once. And like a bow tie, you can't fit everything in. And I have seen some horrific Power BI things where it's like the Star Trek, where it's all whooshing at you, coming out of space with the information overload. So again, cleanliness is good. What do I need it for? What am I using? And you talked when you did yours about we created monsters and then we trimmed it back to what we actually care about.
I've got another question.
Go on then.
Sorry, I'm hogging all
We're in Q&A now, so you're fine.
The data model itself, where you were showing the get, I mean, I understand some of it, but is there any guidance on that model? Because do the names, I know what it's like,
So
when you
read
code it
only-
sometimes they don't always reflect exactly what it is you see
I'm
on
going to go
the...
back to BowTie server and swap page.
And I'm sure the developers in the room will correct me when I've used the wrong terminology, because I'm just a daft chemical engineer. So get is, I'm going to get it. It's read only.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like using that example that I can see effectiveness on the screen, I know what that one is, I can pull that one in easily. Does everything reflect the name exactly? It's like if I was to open, not the bow tie pop-up, but sorry, barrier pop-up, but something else, it reflects the name exactly, so I can just do a simple
Just
control F to
scroll up
find
to
it.
BowTie control, because it doesn't call it a barrier, it calls it a BowTie control.
Yeah.
I think it's not everywhere, and I think it will
Yeah, it
become
goes like
better as
control.
more people use it.
So if you change your language in server, that would change.
No, because this is fundamental language. So you know when you're changing your language and you're going to go from I'm going to change all my barriers to controls. Actually, you don't change the first column. That's my fundamental language. And in that column, it actually calls barriers BowTie controls.
Right.
Bob's going to say that.
Yeah, I think I can add. So the API reflects the database names of the entities and their properties, which are sometimes, like you said, they're different from what's in the user interface. We're not going to change the database schema names, entity names, because that would mess up, right, a lot under the hood. What we can provide, and I think we already have some documentation, is where there's just a mapping. Like typically, BowTie control is a barrier in the UI. Although you can change the taxonomy or the terminology as well, so it might not even be a barrier in your UI, right? But this is the default mapping. We can provide that, but it's good to at least understand that indeed it's not a one-on-one mapping out of the box.
Yeah. Is there any reason it needs the path on it? I'm just thinking for me looking down the list, I'm seeing /API/REST, and
Well, that's the bit, if we go back to the source, that's the bit I'm copying in. So I've got a fixed location wherever my server is, and then I'm copying that second piece in to tell it this is the piece of the table I want.
yeah. I'm probably just overthinking it, but you know I'm keen to start using it.
Yeah, so what this is an endpoint, right? You're calling an endpoint basically where we expect a specific request format. So this is the endpoint, like we're asking that endpoint with this request format, and then we get the right result out. So it's technical stuff. That's
Think of
why
it as
it's-
a library ref. If I ask for that, I'll get the right book out of my data library.
Yeah.
I think the main challenge you might have is that you need to know how the data model sort of fits together.
Yeah.
So for instance, like how does audits work in terms of like there's 6 different tables that are wired together to make that work, and sort of knowing how each individual table connects to each other individual table. That can be a little bit challenging if you're not familiar with the data model, like how BowTie. I mean, if you're familiar with like how a BowTie works, if you think about it, you can figure out most of it, I think.
Yeah.
Just by like connecting the ID and the parent ID, like that's most of it. And there's a couple many-to-many relationships.